7-Day War by Violet Orchid 85. Senators, I have come here today to present my report on the 7-Day War between the Hegemony of First and the Terran Empire. 10 days ago, the Terran Envoy addressed our glorious Galactic Senate and asked us to intervene. To prevent a terrible war, she had said. But what was our response? Laughter and heckling. However much we may have dismissed their plea, the Terran Empire had every right to come and seek a peaceful solution, were it not for one of our scouting expeditions discovering their furthest colony. It may have been many more centuries or even millennia before we encountered the Terran Empire. Furthermore, despite our pleas to the Hegemony to cease their territorial demands and plans to invade Terran space, we, the Galactic Senate, were ignored. Many of you sympathized with the Terrans, but due to the strength of the Hegemony of First, you chose not to raise your voices. I'm sure you have already noticed that the oversized chair to my right, usually occupied by the Hegemony senator, is vacant. Some of you may have even heard rumors that he has fled to the furthest reaches of the known galaxy. Alas, his fate was as swift and preventable as the cause of this war. 9 days ago, as instructed by this Senate, I traveled to the Terran system closest to the Hegemony of First. Upon arrival, I was stunned by the size of their fleet. Many within our glorious Senate had mistakenly thought that the Terran Empire's technology was inferior to ours, and that their fleets, if they had any, were only made up of a small handful of vessels. Senators, we were sorely mistaken. No one aboard our ships could believe what our sensors told us. 10 capital-class warships were escorting the flagship, a mobile shipyard twice their size. Accompanying them were 50 battleships, 80 grand cruisers, 120 missile and artillery cruisers, over 300 frigates of varying classes and 50 carriers. We had to scan the Terran carriers 3 times to believe the number of fighters they carried. By the look on your faces, Senators, many of you find this information hard to believe. It wasn't until my command cruiser and bodyguard of 3 Imperial frigates docked with the Terran flagship that we realized the truth. Waiting for us was Grand Admiral Werner Stuber. After introducing himself, Werner escorted us to the bridge. On the way there, we discussed the coming war, the capabilities of the vessels under his command, and his disappointment that the Galactic Senate did not take the envoy's plea seriously. Arriving at the bridge, we met the Terran Envoy. Unknown to us, she was the chief strategist for the Terran Empire and the Grand Admiral's daughter. The envoy introduced herself as Rodina Roche, and she thanked me for the kind words I had said after she had addressed the Senate. Drawing our attention to the strategy table at the center of the bridge, Werner and Rodina showed us their plan of attack. 5 hours later, my captains and I returned to our ships for a well-earned rest. A bright flash of light drew our attention as we were escorted through the hangar. What we saw made us pause. Off in the distance, the production line for a Terran battleship had just finished assembling its reactor and turned it on for the first time. I have seen planet-bound and spaceborne shipyards before. However, witnessing the birth of a new reactor took my breath away. Before I could ask our escorts any questions, an unexpected shockwave hit us. Thankfully, I kept my footing and turned toward the direction I thought the blast came from. An asteroid was now floating inside the Terran flagship, and behind it was some kind of portal. Within seconds of its arrival, automated harvesting drones rushed to strip the giant asteroid of resources. My captains and I stood there and watched. An hour later, what was left of the asteroid was towed out into space. Returning to my quarters aboard the command cruiser, I rested silently, trying to understand what I had seen. For millennia, our glorious Galactic Senate has existed. We have had wars and encountered dangerous species, but have repeatedly proved our technological prowess. And yet to think there existed a race living in some half-forgotten corner of this galaxy whose technology far surpasses ours. The most insulting part is that the Terran Empire is only 1,000 years old. Before they unified, they hadn't even left their home system. Upon my return to the Senate, I searched our records for anything about the Terran home system. What little information we have describes them as a warlike and primitive race, one so brutal that they even used atomic weapons on themselves. However, I digress. Senators, the following speech was recorded by our ships shortly before the Terran Empire commenced their attack. Citizens of the Empire, a year ago today, a scout vessel from the Galactic Senate made first contact with one of our colonies. We celebrated the news that our empire was not alone in the galaxy. We traded with them, shared knowledge, and even allowed a limited number of their ships to travel throughout our empire. Sadly, one race within the Galactic Senate grew jealous of us, the Hegemony of First. They threatened our borders, arrested our traders, attacked our diplomatic ships, and destroyed our newest colony. The Galactic Senate ignored us after we sent our peace envoy, my beloved daughter, to plead with the Senate to stop the coming war. They laughed at us and insulted us. Today, the hegemony will discover the height of their hubris. Today, we go to war for the Empire. With the conclusion of the Grand Admiral's speech, the Terran flagship opened a single warp tunnel, large enough for the entire fleet of over 400 vessels to enter. To this day, I am still stunned by the size of it. As one, the Terran Empire's fleet entered the tunnel, and within hours we arrived at the nearest Hegemony of First system. Senators, as all of you are aware, I will soon enter my second millennium. Until 7 days ago, I thought I had seen everything. When the defending Hegemony fleet opened fire, I initially expected a quarter of the Terran fleet to be destroyed. However, what the Grand Admiral had neglected to inform my captains and me is that when paired, their capital-class warships are capable of projecting a protective energy field. With the addition of their flagship, each of the 5 fleets, commanded by a pair of capitals, was protected from the initial attack. The Terran fleet attacked once the interference from the explosions had sufficiently dissipated. Wave after wave of fighters left all 50 of their carriers, backed up by wings of anti-ship bombers and multiple squadrons of frigates. By the time the first wave attacked the Hegemony front line, they were already engaged by the missiles and artillery fired at them by the Terran cruisers. One of my captains hailed my command cruiser to point out that the capital-class warships had retreated to the center of their respective fleets. Glancing at the tactical readout displayed on the command table, I noted that a mixture of battleships, grand cruisers, and frigates was protecting them. A hail from the Terran flagship interrupted my attention to the display. The now familiar voice of Grand Admiral Werner Stuber filled the Senate chamber. "Senator, we're bringing the Annihilator array online. I suggest you keep your eyes on the nearby moon." A bright red light erupted from the Terran flagship, and as I rushed toward the main viewport of my command cruiser, it struck the nearby moon. Seconds later, the Hegemony vessels orbiting it exploded, and a cry from my helmsman alerted me to the atmosphere of the moon itself. It glowed a vibrant red for what seemed like hours, but was only seconds, and then the atmosphere burned in a flash of what can only be described as a black light. Minutes later, with the beam of red light still hitting the moon, cracks began to appear along its surface. In mere moments, the moon exploded, destroying a third of the Hegemony fleet. An alarm sounded within the bridge, and I saw a section of the moon heading directly for the Terran flagship. I signaled the comms officer to alert them. However, before we could do so, a portal similar to the one we had seen aboard the flagship appeared. The moon fragment entered the portal and reappeared at the fleet's rear. I initially thought the battle would last several hours, if not days. However, the opening attack by the Terran Empire against the Hegemony of First lasted 1 hour. With the enemy fleet destroyed, I ordered my ships to fall in formation with the Terran flagship. Once they had rescued any Hegemony survivors, the Terran fleet headed for the system's 3rd planet. Entering orbit, the Grand Admiral ordered the unconditional surrender of all remaining Hegemony forces. The response from the 3rd planet was to open fire with their ground-to-space defense weapons. Shortly afterwards, the Terran fleet opened fire and systematically destroyed all military targets on the planet. Once the system was secure, the capital-class warships paired up and headed to their assigned targets. My command cruiser and bodyguard of 3 Imperial frigates stayed with the flagship. Remembering our briefing, I knew our route through the Hegemony of First would eventually lead us to their homeworld. It took the Terran Empire 5 days to achieve their assigned objectives, culminating in the blockade of the Hegemony's home system. Once the 5 fleets had rendezvoused with the flagship, we again traveled through the same large warp tunnel. Arriving at the home system for the Hegemony of First, we encountered the remnants of their fleet, as well as several fortified moons and space stations. Ordering the fleet to blockade the system from the outer edges, the Grand Admiral sent a lone vessel to parley with the surviving leaders of the Hegemony. On the 7th day of the war, as the single Terran spaceship returned to the flagship, it exploded. A gift of peace had been given to the captain on board by the Hegemony senator. I later learned from Werner that the vessel's captain was known to be too trusting, and an investigation afterward suggested that she did not put the gift through the proper scans. With the destruction of their spaceship, the order was given to attack. Each Terran fleet had positioned itself along the galactic plane and assumed a cardinal position, with the flagship high above the Hegemony homeworld. As the attack commenced, the artillery and missile cruisers targeted the space stations, backed up by long-range fire from the battleships. The Terran carriers and frigates kept the Hegemony fleet busy, while the capital-class warships targeted the largest of their ships. Once again, the Terran flagship used its annihilator array to target Hegemony moons with a sizable military presence. After several hours, the Hegemony of First's home system surrendered to the Terran Empire. In the aftermath, the Terran Empire executed the ruling council of the Hegemony of First, assigned a regional governor, and systematically destroyed all military presence within the home system. Senators, I received an after-action report from the Terran Empire before arriving here. They estimate that 95% of the Hegemony of First's military has been destroyed, their population has been reduced by a third, and their industrial output has been reduced by 25%. Furthermore, they intend to retain all outer colonies once controlled by the Hegemony, and 70% of the mineral output from the remaining systems. As I said before, I have never witnessed a war such as the one persecuted by the Terran Empire or its speed, and I encourage my fellow senators and the Galactic Senate never to anger them again. Senators, it may be our end.